day of grad school week. I'm Bob McMahon, Senior Career Coach from the University Career Center. And also with me is Associate Director of the University Career Center, Laura Craig. She'll be monitoring the Q&A and the chat to help respond to any questions you might have. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. First, just be sure you logged into this event through your Handshake account. Second, just to be aware, this event is being recorded. We started this week with information on how to craft an effective personal statement. Then yesterday we had a program geared around preparing for any grad school exams you might have. Now, however, unless you know someone in graduate school, you might be wondering, should I even go? What's the application process like? What is it like in a grad program? Well, today I've assembled an outstanding panel of graduate students from a variety of programs here at Temple University to talk to you about their experiences and answer your questions. While they may not be in a program you specifically are interested in, we all agree that grad school, no matter the program type or the discipline, share some similar characteristics. First, we'll get started by meeting each of our panelists in the order seen on the slide here. So first, tell us, Tyler, what program are you in? How long have you been in it? Maybe a little bit about your research interests.
Sure. Thanks for having all of us. I'm Tyler Burgese. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a third-year PhD student in the Sociology department and the president of our department's Grad Student Association. My research focuses on social media and sexuality. And I also work part-time at the University of Penn School of Nursing on HIV prevention research.
Cool.
I can go next. My name is Clare Moss. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a second-year student in Temple's Master of Public Policy program. My policy interests really are around reproductive health care, environmental, and election policy. And in addition to going to school, I'm also a fellow at the Committee of 70, which is a group that works to promote good government practices and encourage a culture of active civic engagement.
Thanks, Claire. My name is Jack McClaren. I'm a fourth-year student in the Media and Communication program over at Klein College. And my research interests, I do a lot of video game studies, as well as LGBTQ and specifically trans representation in video games and pop culture as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hayley Wight. I'm in my fifth year of the PhD program in criminal justice. And I do research on the intersections of policing and public health and on harm reduction approaches to policing.
Cool. That's some great stuff. So we'll structure the event today like this. I'll ask a series of questions to the panel, which I hope will cover a lot of the things that you and the audience might wonder about. At the end, however, we'll open up the floor to your questions. You can ask them through the Q&A, through the chat, raise your hand if you want to just ask them out loud to the panelists. Let me just stop the share here so we can see everybody in a little bit of a bigger view and get my questions ready to roll. So let me start with this. I'll start with you, Tyler. What motivated you to attend grad school?
Well, I've always really enjoyed doing research. And it wasn't really something that I had thought about or that was on my radar. I was saying before we started, like, I didn't really know any grad students or anybody that had a grad degree before I started. And it came up through a conversation with two regulars actually at a restaurant that I was working at who were professors at Penn, and we just got to talking about their jobs. And I just thought it was really cool. And I also wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do after undergrad. I know that's kind of like a common thing, like to just stay in school, but I just found sociology really interesting. That's what I did for undergrad. So I thought I would see what it was all about and just see where I could kind of continue to develop my own research skills and my own like portfolio.
How about you, Claire? I'm interested in how you got to where you are.
Yeah, so I studied political science down at Tulane in New Orleans, and I had like a really interesting course load. We focused a lot on theory. I learned a lot about different people, but I really felt like I was missing a practical element to my education. And so when I finished up my 4 years at Tulane, I knew that I wanted to continue with a little bit more school. And so I came back home to Philly and was really drawn to Temple's MPP program in particular. One, because of the Philly network that Temple has. And two, like I mentioned, they just really have a practical focus. And so they give you the tools that you need to use policy as a tool for change.
Interesting. And how about you, Hayley? What motivated you to attend graduate school?
I realized towards the end of my undergraduate career that I was really interested in research. I double majored in psych and criminal justice, and was just really enjoying. I took my psych research methods course first, and I was just really enjoying the assignments in there, like grant writing, things like that, coming up with research questions. I really enjoyed all of that more than the kind of clinical side of psychology. So I knew that I wanted to be involved in research and kind of at the high end of research in terms of being involved in drafting the grant proposals and coming up with the research design and things like that, and knew I needed a PhD to do that. So here I am.
So a real practical connection to a future career.
Absolutely.
Jack, video games. Now that's an interesting topic. What motivated you to attend graduate school and bring that with you?
Yeah, so I actually started my undergrad in psychology, and no shade, but I did not like it. But I finished it out, and then I found media and communication. I just fell in love with the material. I'm someone who's always done really well in school, so when it came time to end my undergrad, I'm like, well, I don't want to do anything else. I just want to keep going. So I did my MA, fell in love with research and especially teaching, and then decided, you know what? Might as well keep going since I've spent this much time in school, and now here I am at Klein.
Great. I'll just open this to the panel. You can jump in as you if something motivates you here. Did you take a break? This is a common question that I'm asked in my role as a career coach sometimes. Did you take a break between undergrad and grad school? Or did you go straight through? And do you recommend one over the other? Like, do you have any sense of that? And feel free to go ahead.
I went straight out of undergrad. And like you mentioned, I talked to a bunch of people about, should I work for a little bit? Should I go straight to school? And you're going to get a different answer from everybody. So I think it's really important for you to just kind of make that decision for yourself. I thought that it would be a really hard transition for me. One, acclimating to working, do that for a couple of years, and then have to reacclimate to balancing school and work. So I decided that for me, I was just going to continue on the school route. But I think that you just kind of have to do some reflection for yourself.
I also, I guess, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jack. You can go first.
No, you go.
Oh, okay. I also, I guess, technically started right after undergrad, though I graduated a semester early in December of 2019. So thankfully I wasn't in school when things shut down for COVID. But I did start in the fall of 2020. So I guess I had like a 9 or so month break, but that wasn't necessarily intentional. It was like nice to kind of rest and get ready for grad school. And I also should say I took a gap year in the middle of undergrad. So I did my first 2 years and got an associate degree, and then took a year off, moved here, and then finished my second 2 years. So I do advocate for taking that time for yourself throughout your career if you need it. But yeah.
Yeah, I took 6.5 years to do 2 bachelor's degrees. So, and then I kind of went right into my MA, but I had a gap year between my MA and my PhD, which I think was actually really beneficial because one, I was like super excited to get back to school and back out of the machine shop. So it really gave me, that year gave me a reset of like break and then right into PhD, which I mean, we'll get into it later, but a PhD it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So having that year to work really helped me appreciate going back into school.
Yeah, I had a year off between my master's and PhD, and I am a firm believer that it's the best thing I ever did. I did an accelerated master's program with the Temple Criminal Justice program and then had a year off. I was considering going straight through, but kind of just knew that I would burn out pretty quickly, especially with the course load that PhD students have right in the beginning. I kind of knew that I needed some time off, and faculty members told me I looked well rested when I came back. So firm believer in that. Definitely reflect and kind of see what you need. But I'm a big believer in taking some time off.
That's like the ultimate compliment that you look well rested.
Yes, that is my fondest memory from my visiting student day.
That is great. Did you apply to more than one school, or and if so, how did you deal with acceptance, maybe multiple acceptances or rejections even? I know my own, I applied to 2, I was rejected from 1. So it was a kind of an easier decision, but many of you may have applied to many schools and had choices available. How did you navigate some of those things, if that in fact worked for you?
I can start. I only applied to Temple to begin with. Temple was my first choice, and I think the second choice I had did multiple enrollment periods, kind of like a spring and fall. So I kind of said, I'll start with Temple, they're my top choice, and then I have my GRE scores ready. I can send everything and do my application materials for that school. But I was really laser focused on Temple and got in, so I can't really speak to applying to multiple places.
I applied to 3 different schools. I got into 2, got rejected from 1. And the one I got rejected from was actually my #1 program. So there was like a moment of heartbreak there. And I just had to I gave myself a couple of days before I even told other people, just so I could kind of deal with it myself. And then I was looking at my other 2 options. And so I really did it based on location. Honestly, one, I grew up here in Philly, and then the other school was Tulane, where I spent the past 4 years. And so I was just deciding where I wanted to spend the next couple of years of my life, which felt a little stressful, but what I reminded myself was that nothing's permanent. I just have to make the next best decision for myself, and figure out what my next best step is. And I can always change my mind later.
I applied to 9 PhD programs, and in the interest of transparency, Temple's the only one that I got into. So that choice was pretty easy. And honestly, the rejection wasn't too hard because I just tried to have no expectations. I know that that's harder in practice than to say that, but I just tried not to expect too much. I focused on 2 areas when I was looking for schools. One was schools in the top 10 schools for sociology, and then other was location based. So I did apply to Temple, Penn, and University of Delaware because I'm from South Jersey, wanted to ideally stay local. But of course, it would have been cool to go to Harvard or Berkeley or something. So I applied to schools like that too. But yeah, that's how I chose to go here.
Cool.
I'm kind of like Tyler. I applied to 7, and when I was applying, I made sure to pick at least one faculty member I'd want to work with and reach out to them and have a conversation. So obviously here at Temple, Adrian Shaw was the person I wanted to work with. I got into 2. I was waitlisted on 1. So basically it was the choice between stay in Canada or come to Temple and work with the person I wanted to work with. So it was having a faculty I really wanted to work with. And then once I found out about funding and money and how I was gonna, survive, that really helped me make my decision, the financial part, and then the people that were gonna be there.
Yeah, I should also say that if I could do it again, I'd probably apply to less just because it is kind of expensive to pay the application fees and everything for each school, which is something that I hadn't thought of until we just started talking about this, but that's definitely something to consider as well.
I do want to circle back to the question of relocating, because it sounds like a couple of you, that was part of your process. And this could be part of the process for some of the students here considering grad school. It's not going to be at Temple per se, it could be anywhere, right? So if you did relocate, how did that add to the complexity or the stress? How did you navigate that? Would you recommend that? Jack, go ahead. You have probably the furthest distance, maybe, or the most complicated, being kind of internationally oriented.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Windsor, Ontario, Canada. So it's about a 2-hour plane ride, about a 10-hour drive. It was difficult, and so that was 3 years ago. I'm 30 years old now, so about 26, 27. I feel like this is the first time like actually leaving my parents' house to move away. So that was really challenging. I'm not sure I would recommend that. Like, if I were any younger and less mature, I think I would have had a way more difficult time. But a lot of internet searching, finding out, where I wanted to live, visiting the city and finding out, like, do I like this place? Do I feel safe? Do I want to live here? Those were all like super integral choices before I committed to coming to Temple, to just like be here in the city and find out whether it's somewhere I can live. But it was challenging. It was a growing period for sure, but I think I'm better off for it. So I would recommend it for sure, but I'd recommend doing a lot of research and actually going to the city first to see, if I can even live here,
How about you, Claire? I mean, you said you were from Philly, but you were at Tulane.
So yeah, my big relocation was for undergrad as opposed to grad school. And I would kind of just echo what Jack said, that it can be really difficult those first couple months. You really have to be intentional with creating community and really putting yourself out there to meet people. But on the flip side, I think that I grew so much. I also became much more independent during that time. And so I think that those skills are really invaluable. And now I think that I have a home here in Philly and New Orleans, and I could totally see myself living in either place.
Great. Let's talk about the application process broadly. How long generally to put the materials together? How long did that take for you, from transcripts, letters of recommendation, personal statements? When did you start, and what did you find? What was the hardest part of all of that? Hayley, kick us off with that one.
Sure. My application deadline was mid-December, I believe, right before Christmas. So I told myself the deadline was December 1st to kind of leave wiggle room for if a letter came in later or something like that. I started preparing for the GRE and reaching out to folks for my letters of recommendation in late August. I also should preface this by saying I am not good at standardized testing. It's never been my strong suit. I'm the first person to admit that. So I knew that I needed kind of a lot of prep for the GRE that I was taking in. I believe I took the GRE early October to leave myself time to take it again if I needed. So yeah, and also when I reached out to one of the faculty, she was on sabbatical. So it was really kind of crucial to reach out early. I also asked one of the faculty members to provide some feedback on my personal statement. So I kind of did that a bit early too. I think giving yourself 3 months to put everything together, I would say, is what I would recommend. But the first thing I think you should do is identify faculty for your letters of recommendation and give them ample time. And then the hardest part of the application, besides the GRE, but that's a me problem, was crafting the personal statement. I would say it's kind of difficult to articulate why you want to go to a graduate program, and it's interesting that it's very different from applying to a job. When you're applying to a job, you're like, I have all these skills, hire me. And when you're coming to a PhD program, you're asking for training. So you kind of have to say, maybe I have this, but I'm kind of missing X, Y, and Z, and I need to work with these faculty members to give me that training. So it's a very kind of different way to go about applying and asking to go somewhere. So I found kind of the personal statement to be the most difficult part.
Tyler, I'm interested in your answer because you applied to 9 schools. So that timeline must have been very complicated and a lot, labor intensive. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so most deadlines were in or around December as well. I gave myself a deadline of like the day before Thanksgiving, just so that I could like hand everything in, like have a nice holiday and then like relax. So I started the process in around May of 2019, and again, I applied that fall during my last semester of undergrad. So I started with, like Hayley said, like reaching out to faculty that I knew could write me letters and GRE prep because I really struggle with standardized tests as well. I took the GRE in June and September because I didn't do so hot in June and then did a little bit better in September, but like one section I did better and the other section I did worse. It was kind of annoying. So I just sent all of my scores. It's not like the SAT where you can like super score it. So I did have to kind of just send everything. But then over the summer and in the fall, I was working up mostly on my writing sample, which was my undergrad thesis, that I was like working on with a professor in an independent study in the fall. And I would definitely agree that the personal statement was the hardest for me. That was like 2 pages and my writing sample was like 35. And I did struggle more, I think, with the personal statement, just because for me, it's like weird you have to like really hype yourself up and like talk about yourself in kind of an uncomfortable way and like your accomplishments, and also just like find the right way to talk about the program and like not butter them up too much, but just say like why you think it's a good fit and who you might want to work with, or just why the school or the area might be interesting to you. And since I had 9 applications, I had like a standard letter that there was like a paragraph in each that was tailored specifically to each school. And then of course I would change the address and like the names of the schools. But that's kind of how I went about it. So it felt like a long process, but I was definitely glad to be done before Thanksgiving.
And Jack, you had an equally high number of applications to go through. How was that for you?
Yeah, it's similar to Tyler. I mean, talking like nicely about myself was a little hard in the letter. So that took a good mix of revising to like really sell myself, but also doing the research on each school to be able to kind of show like, hey, I've done my research. I know what your program's about. I'd like to work with this person, and this is what I'm interested in. The GRE was definitely my biggest rival. I really struggled with the math components, but I ended up having to take it once, which GRE is surprisingly lots of money. I bought some books, like testing books, that really helped, but definitely the GRE I think was like my biggest enemy. So I'd say for sure taking a couple months to just prep for the GRE it saved my butt. That's what I'll say.
Claire, in a master's program like the one you applied to, does it contain some of those same components, testing, personal statements, and how did that work out for you?
So I was really lucky since I was still an undergrad. I had a career coach kind of like you to help me guide me through the process. And so we created like a timetable for me. All my applications were due mid-December. And the way that I kind of did it was I focused on school by school based on like my priorities. So I did my number 1 school, got that application in first, then worked towards that second school and then the third school. Luckily, I did not have to take the GRE. So that was awesome. But I would agree with everybody that the personal statement was the hardest part, because you kind of have to like hit the fine line of remaining authentic, but telling a good story and connecting your story to the school. So you have a bunch of different elements that you need to incorporate, often in just like a page or 2. So you have to make your words count. But I would write my essays, submit it to my career coach. She would revise it, and we would just go back and forth until we got it to a spot that we both liked.
Great, great. So let's shift gears a little bit to, we've sort of covered the leading up to. Now let's think about, okay, you are here. You have landed in the program that you were accepted to, that you wanted to be in, whatever the case may be. What was that first couple of days or week or 2 like? Can you remember how that felt? And can you describe those feelings? And whoever wants to jump in first, go for it.
I remember being very intimidated the first couple days because since I just started right out of undergrad, I was by far the youngest. So I was sitting in these classes. And the thing with grad school is you have no idea how old the people sitting next to you are. So we'd be going through our credentials and they'd be like, I work at this really impressive organization and I work here. And at the time I was nannying right out of undergrad and stuff. So I felt a little bit intimidated, but I had to remind myself that I also worked very hard to get into this program and that I was supposed to be there in that room alongside them.
That's
I
a great
similarly am sorry.
No.
I'm also the youngest in my department, so that like really was challenging mentally to just like, yeah, just like get over the imposter syndrome and believe that like I'm also worthy and smart. But I started in the fall of 2020, so my entire first year was online. So it almost didn't feel real for me, at least the first couple of weeks, because I would like go to a 2.5-hour class and then just like sit in my room and like do my work. Like it just felt very strange. And like we did like my cohort is 4 people that started with me. So we would like try to like socialize like outside or like do Zoom calls together and like just get to know each other. But that was definitely a challenge. And thankfully that is not the case for people that would be starting in the future. But that was kind of my experience of the first bit of grad school.
I think I'll say this bluntly. It was a real shock to not be like one of the brightest, smartest people in the room, because I feel like in undergrad, all grad school students are kind of like in the top 5% of their cohort, right? So then you get to PhD and you're like, wow, we've all been kind of the smartest people in academics throughout our entire lives, and now you're sitting in a room with like other brilliant people. So getting like over the intimidation of being like, oh my God, like do it, kind of what Claire was saying, like, who am I if I'm not like the best student? Actually took a bit of a culture shock to realize like we're all smart in different ways. And then kind of also moving away from this idea of like numerical grades as giving you an idea of how you're doing was also in that first couple months. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I don't just get like 90s and like know that I'm doing well. It's a completely different learning style too. So the culture of that was definitely a shift.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a shift transitioning to smaller courses, more focused material. The amount of reading you have to do for a particular course is an adjustment, but then also kind of figuring out everyone's participation styles in class. I think graduate courses, it's a lot more of kind of an open discussion at all times. I very rarely have courses that are like PowerPoint slides, and so it's kind of like the momentum of the class really depends on all the students. So I think taking time to learn about your colleagues and kind of how they participate and their views and everything is an adjustment. I also told myself that I needed to review like all of criminological theory before I began. So I like read a bunch of books over the summer to refresh my memory. And that was, I should have just been resting. So I don't recommend that. Maybe like reread your favorite work or something, but like you don't need to go in there knowing every single thing.
You know, it's a great observation or place where you started talking about, Hayley, because it connects to a question that Eric in the audience asked about, and maybe the rest of you can kind of expand on where Hayley started. The question is, what's the difference in intensity of grad courses compared to undergrad courses?
I'd say they're definitely more intense. It's just kind of like a different like pace of learning. I think it's pretty common, at least in sociology, for a class to have to read a book every week. Like I was told that coming in and I was like, there's no way, like that doesn't happen. But that has been my experience. Like I have an urban sociology class this semester where we truly discuss a different book every week. So just like learning how I process information and like at least like learning like what I need to do to feel prepared for the class, not necessarily reading every word of every book or like stressing myself out over that, but just like how do I get what I need to know? How can I like communicate that I understand it? And also like what do I want to get from this class? Like how can I kind of maximize that? And also just like, yeah, so there's the reading part, and then for most like seminar courses in my department, like you have to write some kind of cumulative paper at the end of the semester. So that was also interesting too, because I really had to revise the way that I take notes to be able to like really draw on all of the readings that I've done and show that I've been like present in understanding the course so far.
Tyler, speaking of writing papers, I wonder if you notice a distinction from, say, the number of pages you would write, say, in an undergraduate course versus what you were being asked in your sociology program.
That's a good question. I don't remember too much about, I mean, undergrad papers were probably like maybe 5 to 8 pages for like a final paper. And the standard in my department is to write about 25 to 30 pages per semester. So that it's rare that that's like the whole final paper. Most of my classes will do like a 10 to 15 page like midterm-ish paper or like halfway point paper where we're a bit more guided and like we get a prompt. And then the final paper will be another 10 to 15 pages, kind of on a topic of your choosing or like synthesizing the readers or the theorists that we've learned about so far.
Mm-hmm. Claire, how about you? What's the reading, writing load like in your program?
I would say we're heavy on both. There's a big emphasis in our program specifically on writing because a lot of times as policymakers, you have to write memos. So you need to condense a ton of information into a very short 1 or 2 page document. So we spend a lot of time just honing our writing skills in that way. And then also professors really care about active participation in class. Like I think in undergrad, you are kind of able to skid by in some classes by not really contributing to conversation. But I think that professors in the MPP program really want to hear what students think and really want to hear from everybody in the room.
How about you, Jack? I know you have some heavy writing loads.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is there's no more like multiple choice or fill in the blank tests. In graduate school, it's all, I'd say on average per class, it's about maybe 100 to 200 pages of reading a week. And then you're also writing, like Tyler, the long-term papers. But you really, in graduate school, you're learning how to read differently than you did in undergrad. Not just to kind of like briefly understand, but you're learning how to understand and form arguments, right? And then being able to articulate that in class. So I think that would be the main difference between graduate and undergrad classes.
Great. Eric, I hope that kind of got to the root of your question. If not, feel free to ask some more. I'm going to move on to maybe stepping outside of the academic aspect of grad school. How about just things like workload or work-life balance, financial impacts? There's a number of ways that people navigate, for example, paying for it, living from day to day. That is always, it's going to vary from person to person. The pressures that go on outside of the classroom, outside of how that influences your experience. I wonder if any of you could talk about that. You don't have to disclose how much money you make or anything like that if you want to, but please feel free to jump in.
I think that it's really important as a grad student to keep work-life balance in mind because it's really, really easy to just feel like you constantly have to be doing work. There's nearly always something else that you could be working on. So I think that it's really important to set clear boundaries with yourself. So like I try to have one day on the weekend that I do not do any schoolwork just to kind of keep my sanity. And I think that something that's really helped is talking to people in your program because it can be really difficult to talk about this with people who aren't in the experience right now. And so it can be validating when you're like, oh my gosh, we're so busy literally all the time, to have somebody say, I hear you, I'm right there with you, and like, we can make this happen. In terms of finances, all the MPP classes are taught at night. So I'm lucky that I can work during the day. So like I mentioned, I work at the Committee of 70, and then I'm also a student worker with our program. So I work from 9 to 5, 3 days a week, and 9 to 2, 2 days a week, and then go to class at night.
Yeah, I want to echo what Claire said about maintaining boundaries and having at least one day of the week where you're like, I am not touching anything. I'm not opening my laptop unless I'm watching Netflix, and having those clear boundaries, because if you don't, you're just going to burn out and you're not going to be able to be productive for the rest of the week and keep the momentum. One of the adjustments that I had, even from like undergrad and my master's to PhD, was realizing that I need a lot of like quiet work time when you're kind of reading and needing to synthesize such a large amount of material, or you're writing or you're working on stats papers. You can't really have like distractions, at least I can't. So in undergrad, or from a couple of my master's classes, like it was kind of like, oh yeah, maybe I can like hang out with my roommates while we watch a movie and I'll, get some work done on my laptop. But that isn't as possible in when you get further along in grad school. So it's kind of hard to say no to your friends all the time when they're like, oh, let's watch The Bachelor tonight. And you're like, oh, I can't. And they're like, bring your laptop. And you're like, no, I really can't interpret stata output while I'm watching The Bachelor. So it's kind of hard to learn those adjustments. And then for my program, a lot of the PhD students come in with funding. So you work as a research assistant or a teaching assistant for 20 hours a week. We get tuition remission for that. So our classes are covered and we get a stipend. Temple's great because the grad students are unionized. So we have our health insurance covered. Yeah, so we work for the university and get paid that way. It's not a lot, but it's livable. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely agree with everyone so far. I work a part-time job, like I mentioned. It's only 10 hours a week, but it does really help with my cost of living and just being comfortable. And similar to what everyone else said, like one day a week away from school is absolutely crucial for me to function. But I've learned that 2 days a week would actually be ideal. So like not working on the weekends. Like I think everyone here knows that that's not always possible, and I'm not really the best with this. Like I go into every semester like, yes, I'm not working on weekends. Like that's like I'm gonna close my computer on Fridays and come back on Mondays. But like I said, sometimes that just doesn't happen. I probably take the whole weekend off maybe like 3 or 4 times a semester, which feels amazing. But the rest of the time I do have to work at least one day on the weekend. That's everything that I'm thinking of right now, but I'll chime back in if I think of something else.
Yeah, I feel the same way as the other three about work-life balance. As a grad student, it's hard to do life things outside of work, so that's important. Financially, I will say as an international student, I have a fellowship, which is the highest funding package Temple offers to graduate students. I'm also not allowed to work in this country because I'm an international student, and that's actually been really challenging because I'm on a stipend and that's it. I can't make any more money in this country. So if I'm financially struggling, that's tough. I'm thankful that Temple pays most graduate students, so it's okay. But financially, grad school is a little bit challenging for paying for things. So that would be something that I would suggest plan for, and just kind of be ready to fall on a little bit of debt, no matter what kind of funding package you get.
The other thing I'll say related to funding packages is not all of them, at least in my department, cover all 12 months. Most of the students in my department have 9-month funding packages. And there is like a research grant that you can get for funding over the summer. But it's common to have to work over the summer, either a research job or just like a side job.
Great. So here's a question that's come in from Savannah. She's wondering if any of you have done undergraduate research, and if that helps or is different than doing graduate level research.
I did.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go
I
ahead.
did any research as an undergrad.
I did. I did some independent research that, like I said, was my writing sample, which was like a content analysis of gay men's Instagram posts. So my advisor kind of helped me through that. And she was also my research methods professor. So that was like a way to kind of apply what I had learned. I'll say that like I would do a similar project now in grad school, just with a different set of skills and like a different familiarity with the literature that I'm building on. But it was a very similar experience to kind of do independent research in that way. And in undergrad and grad school, I also worked as a research assistant for a professor. And that was, in my experience, mostly just like reading and writing literature reviews. And those, I think there's a higher expectation for grad students because that is like what will usually end up being part of the published paper that the professor is writing. But that's been my experience.
Yeah, I worked as a research assistant to a professor for a summer research project. I was kind of doing a lot of the like administrative kind of task. I was transcribing interviews, wrote a few memos for some qualitative research. And then I got a undergraduate research grant during my senior year of undergrad. And I kind of was able to make my own research project. So I had to work really closely with the same professor to kind of develop, like a mock kind of qualitative research project that was really interesting. I got to carry it out. It was, pretty small scale, but still taught me a lot of skills that I was able to say, yes, I've written a grant proposal. Yes, I've used this software. So I think those undergraduate research experiences are really important for kind of building your skill set.
I did not do undergraduate research. I took a lot of research courses, so I learned theoretically and did kind of smaller stuff. But honestly, that didn't preclude me from like any sort of research at the graduate level. So even if you don't do it, I don't think it's a barrier, but I think it's nice to get some hands-on, like knowing how to do the thing before you have to actually do it in grad school.
All right, hopefully, Savannah, that kind of hits your question. Of course, if it doesn't, we'll come back to you. You can ask another one or chime in towards the end here. So since we're moving towards the end, let me just kind of ask this larger question for each of you. So you're in different stages of your program, but you are all in a program. What do you now, looking back, say, boy, I wish I knew this before I started, or I wish I had done this differently before I started? Do you have any regrets? Kind of those overarching questions that I'm sure you think about from time to time. Hayley looks like she has something forefront of her mind, so go for it, Hayley.
Sure. I wish that I had kind of thought ahead a bit more and set specific goals for myself for each academic year. I kind of did that, but really only thought about maybe the first 3 years of my program. PhD programs can range anywhere from 4 years to 8, depending on your dissertation. So my program tends to run a little long. I think our average completion time is about 7 years. So I kind of wish that I made more of a plan for myself, because after your coursework is complete and you transition to kind of working entirely independently, you don't have that structure of courses and deadlines. It's a very hard transition. So I wish that I had thought a little bit more about specific academic year goals. Maybe like, okay, I have to take my comprehensive exams this year, and I'd also like to get my research paper requirement done. And then during year 5, I work on my dissertation proposal. Year 6, I collect my dissertation data. Year 7, I defend my dissertation. I kind of wish I thought about that timeline a bit more, because when things like COVID happen, it kind of disrupts everything. And it's very easy to go along day to day getting your tasks done and not thinking about the kind of larger program milestones that you need to be completing. So I think that is one thing I definitely wish I thought of earlier.
I don't necessarily regret this because I didn't know any better when I started, but I wish I had thought a little bit more about what I wanted my research to be going into grad school, because I didn't even really know that the whole idea is like you're supposed to be building like a research agenda or portfolio and like using your coursework to help you carry that out, essentially leading up to a dissertation. So my first 2 years I spent studying OnlyFans and online sex work on OnlyFans. And that was just because it was like a random idea that I had in my first qualitative methods course. And it was a really cool project and ended up being my master's thesis for my second year paper. But like, I didn't really intend to do that coming in. So I wish I had like spent a little bit more time thinking about like, what is most interesting to me? What would I like to study? And like, how would I like to integrate my coursework into that? But I'd also say that like, if I could tell my past self, like not everything needs to contribute to that. Like, I think it's very valuable to one, like take courses outside of your department if that's a possibility, but also just to like follow what is interesting to you. Like right now I'm taking urban sociology, like I said, and that really has nothing to do with my research interests, but it's a great professor. It's been a really enriching course and I love my colleagues in my class. So like not everything has to like serve a higher purpose, which I think can take some of the pressure off of some classes.
I'm working on getting better at this, but I'm really trying to establish connections with my professors because they're really cool practitioners and they've all done really amazing research. And I think especially with grad students, they're really open to chatting with you more and they really want to help you succeed, not only in the program, but also after. And so making sure that you establish like good connections with everybody is a real key takeaway from grad school. And then also I think just like reminding myself to give myself some grace and remember that you have a lot going on and you don't need to do everything perfectly and like it will be okay, is also what I would tell myself.
Two things that I think are key. One, like I would tell my first year self, like find yourself a good therapist ASAP, because your self-esteem will take a beating. It's worth it. But yeah, mental health is super important. Find a good therapist. And then the second part is, I would have told myself to rethink the way I'm accepting critique of my writing. That's been like super hard because going into grad school, it's all about like other people reading your stuff and giving you feedback. So the sooner you can kind of flip the script on like, okay, like don't kind of feel defensive, like, you know, read the critiques and reviews and then just take it in as like, you know, you're not being clear, you need to change things and not like taking it personally. So just getting used to being critiqued and not taking it as like an attack, but like other people are trying to help you. I wish I would have learned that way sooner than, you know, my third year. So that's been difficult, but it's worth it now that I can kind of accept critique on my writing.
That's good advice from all of you. I appreciate all of that. I think what I'd like to do now is open it up to questions from our attendees. And you can ask those questions through the chat, through the Q&A. If you raise your hand on Zoom, we'll unmute you if you want to, you know, vocalize your question. Happy to do that now.
I just wanted to say to all the panelists, thank you for participating and really sharing your stories. I think this is just so often the kinds of questions that Bob, myself, other members of our team are getting asked, and really, it's really beneficial information.
It is interesting as you talked about building out some time for yourself. Yeah, it's funny. I did the same thing as I went through, and for some reason I landed on Friday was the day that I stopped, you know, any focused effort on school stuff. I still am in that mindset, but it's harder to get away with. Oh, here comes a question from, let's see, Alex. Is research something every master's student experiences? Oh, that's a good question.
So I have had to like analyze data that's already existed. So like, for example, I did a quantitative analysis of the relationship between race and suspension in Philadelphia schools. But I haven't had to go and conduct my own research, gather data myself. It's more taking existing data and then analyzing it and communicating those findings.
Does
I
that
guess
answer?
I'll-
Oh, go ahead, Tyler.
I guess I'll say, like, in my department, we get a master's kind of on the way to PhD. And in
Mhm.
order to get that, we did have to go through both qualitative and quantitative research courses. And both involve, well, the quantitative one was secondary data. But qualitative was very much like doing field work and conducting interviews and like kind of chartering your own research project.
Yeah, I will say, I think that really the point of grad school is they're teaching you how to do research, whether that's master's or PhD. So you will get, I'd wager, some sort of research experience. In my MA program, which was back in Canada, University of Windsor, your culminating thing to get out of the program is at least a major research paper. So you got to do it to get your degree and get out.
All right, Alex, hopefully that hits the nail on the head for you there. Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to do a going once, going twice, going 3 times. And looks like no more questions. So I want to thank our panelists for your insight. I appreciate all of the responses you gave and your honesty, openness to your stories. I thank the attendees for coming. This concludes the 3rd day of grad school week. Tomorrow we'll have a similar panel of speakers, but these folks are going to be recent grads, folks that have hit the finish line and now are out in the world, and they're looking back and can reflect on the experience from that point of view. So I hope you'll have a chance to attend that if you haven't already registered. And again, thank you everybody for joining us today. It's been really insightful.